So what are we talking about this? Common mistakes in weak arguments. And I think this is an appropriate picture because a logical fallacy actually blinds the person to to the logic that is being used, if you even want to call it logic. So the definition of a logical fallacy represent flaws in reasoning that lead to faulty, illogical statements. They are unreasonable, argumentative tactics named for what has gone wrong during the reasoning process. Essentially, most logical fallacies masquerade as reasonable statements, but they are in fact attempts to manipulate the reader by reaching their emotions instead of their intellects, or by using some other trick to advance their argument other than critical reasoning. So the fallacy of relevance. The fallacies of relevance clearly failed to provide adequate reason for believing the truth of their conclusions. They are often used in attempts to persuade people by non-logical means. Only the unwary, the predisposed, and the gullible are apt to be fooled by their illegitimate appeals. Many of them were identified by medieval and Renaissance logicians whose Latin names for them have passed into common use. And as we think about these logical fallacies, some of them are, I like to give relevance of this course to the research process, to the reading the literature, and what some of these fallacies are actually present in papers that you read for your clinical work, for research work, and you have to be aware of when an author is actually presenting the reason for their argument that really doesn't make sense, and you have to be able to pick that up. So let's go through what these fallacies are. One of them is ad hominem, and that's Latin for to the man. Is that essentially what we have is that a person directly attacks someone's appearance, personal habits, or character rather than focusing on the merit of the issue at hand. The implication is that if something is wrong with this person, then whatever he or she says must be wrong as well. So for an example, we have here, how can you say that Mohammed's position on abortion is true when he's been in and out of drug rehab for 3 years? So this statement is attacking the person, trying to make the argument that he's been in and out of drug rehab for the 3 years, so, and hence his position on abortion cannot be believed, where the two has no relationship with the other. Ad hominem, making it personal. So, for example, someone says, Sarah is divorced, so whatever relationship advice she gives you can't be good. Just because a person is divorced doesn't mean the person can't give good advice. So essentially, Sarah's marital status has nothing to do with the quality of her advice. Isn't it also possible that Sarah could be married and give awful advice as well? So, for example, if my husband forgot to wash his dish, I would move out too. You did the right thing, Carol. So, you have to think about that reasoning. Some more examples. The arguer suggests that her opponent's view is unacceptable because it's some negative character trait. So essentially, ad hominem, one attacks the person rather than the argument itself. People who say that For example, people who say that hazing in the military is wrong are just a bunch of wimps. So attacking uh, yeah, the, uh, the people claiming that they're wimps and therefore their argument is is not to be listened to. He's a liar, so there's no reason to listen to him. But Ginsburg arguments are nothing but trash. Ginsburg was a marijuana smoking homosexual and thoroughgoing advocate of the drug culture. So again, these are all examples of attacking the person. So another type of logical fallacy is an inappropriate appeal to authority. This fallacy occurs when an arguer cites an authority who there is good reason to believe is unreliable, or you don't know the reliability of the person, and therefore you can't accept the argument just because an appeal to authority. The implication is that if someone is an expert or so-called an expert, then whatever he or she says must be correct. Examples: when the source cited is not a genuine authority on the subject under consideration, when there is reason to believe that the source is biased, when the accuracy of the source's observation is questionable, when the source cited, well, like a media source, reference work, or internet source, is known to be generally unreliable. This is uh, common, the internet source. You have to wonder about the reliability of any internet source. Um, I may say that's one of the problems with artificial intelligence, is that there may be a problem with the reliability of AI. In fact, when you use the AI programs, it says there's a disclaimer, AI might be wrong, so you have to be careful. Um, and all, lastly, when the source has not been cited correctly, or the citor's claim has been taken out of context, or when the source's claim conflicts with expert consensus. Actually, all this uh, the when the source's claim conflicts with expert consensus, think about the vaccine hesitancy, since you brought up COVID. Um, on one hand, uh, the vaccine deniers conflicts with expert consensus. However, I will say that there might be sometimes a problem with expert consensus, as we saw in the COVID epidemic, that there were expert consensus from the CDC in the U.S. and now people are wondering if if those experts got it right. And so even the experts, you have to be careful about. Just because they're so-called experts, that doesn't mean you can't uh, take it on faith just because they're considered an expert. Inappropriate appeal to authority. For example, most immigrants who enter this country wind up in jail or on welfare. I know this because I read it on the White Power Worldwide website. Okay, and why is this an inappropriate appeal to authority? What's being taken as the authority?
The is general statement. Power Worldwide website. A general statement, not specific about some organization that is appeal for authorities.
Well, it's not a general statement. It's yeah, it's um, a uh, the I mean, this source, the White Power World website, um, is I mean, I've never heard of it, and one have to check the reliability of anyone appealing to the internet. One common thing is people usually cite Wikipedia as a reference. When when a student hands in a paper and they cite Wikipedia, I I I have to bring up some concerns about the reliability of Wikipedia. Having said that, I use Wikipedia a lot to find out general information about a subject, but um, uh, I don't use that as an appropriate authority. So again, be careful about internet websites. Dr. Stanford B. Higginbotham, a leading social philosopher, has argued that capital punishment is always morally wrong. Given Dr. Higginbotham's impressive credentials, we should conclude that capital punishment is always morally wrong. So what do you think about that?
Mm, it's depend on
As
what.
yeah, there is not. It's also some general word is there that's always morally wrong. The statement is generalizing or making it indefinite. It's always. So the word always is not appropriately suitable.
Well, it could be that
Maybe
capital punishment is always morally wrong, but what's the basis of the argument?
the person itself.
What do you mean?
I mean, it's depend on one opinion of Dr. Stanford, which is someone who cannot be generalized.
We conclude that.
Oh, what do you mean by cannot be generalized? Um,
That mean I don't know if he is expert on this opinion, and to generalize it over, يعني, he concluded that is capital punishment is always morally wrong. This is not depend on one situation in one person. It cannot be.
right, yeah, it's just one person. He um, may be a leading social philosopher, but in order to argue that capital punishment is always morally wrong, you have to give a reason to accept that statement. You can't accept a statement on blind faith that this person says it's always morally wrong. I do not see any reason given why someone says it's always morally wrong.
Mhm.
And even with this is something similar to the abortion debate. Someone will say uh, abortion is wrong because it's killing. Okay, well, you have to. That's not an appeal to authority. Actually, as we'll show later on, that's an appeal to emotion. Abortion is killing, and but that's not uh, uh, an adequate reason. You have to explain uh, why you think it's killing. On the other side, someone says, well, a fetus is not a person, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to get into the uh, abortion debate, at least not now. But um, the but this in this sentence, it's there is no logical reasoning regarding capital punishment. And the only reasoning power here is the person. And you're right, he's just one person, and and there's other people who will say capital punishment is not always morally wrong, and now you have to dig dig into the weeds as to what is the reason. And you can't just have what we're calling here an inappropriate appeal to authority. The source's claim, which is the person, cannot be settled. Well, the source's claim, which is morally wrong, cannot be settled by an appeal to an expert opinion. And as you said, it's only one person and there's no expert consensus that exists. So be careful when someone cites any person as to a reason why a statement is true or false. Ad hominem, circumstantial. Well, I should have had this before when I was talking about ad hominem. Again, the arguer suggests that her opponent's view is false because the opponent has something personal to gain if it's accepted. So, for example, of course, France opposed the war in Iraq. They got millions of dollars of contracts at stake. Okay, so one is claiming that France opposed the war because of a personal gain, but that doesn't make the war necessarily unjust. It might be unjust for other reasons. Another example, we should disregard the scientists' argument because they're being funded by the logging industry. Well, one is always concerned about a conflict of interest. We have that in the when pharmaceutical companies pay experts, and we're concerned about the experts then giving an opinion, and that might be so. So the existence of a conflict of interest doesn't necessarily mean that the argument is wrong, but you want to know why it's wrong. You can't just appeal to a conflict of interest as to why the argument doesn't make any sense, if that makes sense. I guess what I'm saying, someone with a conflict of interest, you should be concerned, but you still want to hear the expert's opinion, whether they're paid by the drug company or not. You can't just say he's paid by the drug company and therefore their reason has no basis. I'm going backwards. Okay. Ad hominem to pork. I can't pronounce that, but it means you too. The arguer suggests that her opponent's position is inconsistent with their own beliefs or actions, and therefore the position is false. So, for example, you're telling me to stop speeding on the highway. You received more speeding tickets than I have. Gore is a hypocrite on campaign finance issues. He's raised as much money as anyone. You say I shouldn't drink, but you haven't been sober for more than a year. So essentially, you're saying that an arguer or an opponent is giving a certain statement and it's inconsistent with their own beliefs or action, and therefore the position is wrong. Well, just because there's inconsistency in what someone says and their behavior doesn't necessarily mean their argument is incorrect. Again, you want to have better reasoning as to why the argument is incorrect. You can't appeal to their behaviors. Another type of logical fallacy is what we call the red herring or the smoke screen. It's when the arguer changes the subject and takes the listener down a different unrelated path. So, for example, environmentalists are continually harping about the dangers of nuclear power. Unfortunately, electricity is dangerous no matter where it comes from. Every year, hundreds of people are electrocuted by accidents, Since most of the accidents are caused by carelessness, they could be avoided if people would just exercise greater okay, so what I'm trying to say, okay, we're talking about the dangers of nuclear power. Okay. However, the next sentence has nothing to do with nuclear power. It's to start talking about electricity, which has no relationship to nuclear power. So now the person changes the subject and takes the listener down an unrelated pathway. Right. So again, the red herring presenting an argument unrelated to your subject in order to distract the reader. Again, another example, in order to really look at the problem of global warming, we must first consider how the homeless suffer when it's cold. Well, global, how the homeless suffer when it's cold, okay, is not an argument to claim that global warming is 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 going to be a problem. Now, it seems that it might be related to when the homeless suffer when it's cold, uh, but uh, but even that has no relationship to global warming. So it's unrelated to the subject at hand. Another type of logical fallacy is guilt by association. The arguer suggests her opponent's views should be rejected because the opponent is a member of a perceived disreputable group, or the views of the opponent are also held by persons of a disreputable group. So it's guilt by association. If the arguer is associated with a group that cannot be trusted, then it's essentially guilt by association. So, for example, nationalized healthcare programs are unacceptable because they are the sort of thing that communists support. Well, the communists may support it, but that's not an argument as to why nationalized healthcare programs are unacceptable. Another example, there's no reason to deal with Arafat. He's a known terrorist. Well, that's he may be a member or was a member of a terrorist group. That doesn't necessarily mean his argument has no substance. Or politician X once spoke with the leader of the KKK. Well, that, again, just because one associates with the KKK doesn't necessarily mean that politician X argument is unsound. Ad populum. This is a very popular logical fallacy. No pun intended. The arguer appeals to the sheer number of persons who agree with the belief or to the popularity of the belief as evidence that it is true. So, for example, because a majority of Americans believe in UFOs, they must exist. That many people can't be wrong. So, again, the majority is not always necessarily right. Okay. They don't, again, you can't use that as a substitute for logical reasoning. I mean, the majority might be right, but it's an empty reasoning, if I could say that. If the only thing you say is that a majority believes in it, well, you have to explain why they believe in it to have an effective argument. Here, 4 out of 5 dentists recommend brushing with pure cane sugar. Okay. Well, actually, this is not only an an argument from the popularity of the belief, but one could say this is an argument by an appeal to authority as well. One is appealing to dentists. And though I don't think dentists would recommend brushing with pure cane sugar, but that's another issue. Here's a very common one. I mentioned this before: appeals to pity. The arguer tries to get you to accept their view on the grounds that they will be harmed if you don't, or an appeals to emotion. So, for example, I really need you to give me an A in this course. I know I didn't do that well, but an average grade will bring my grade point average down. So the student is just arguing for pity or give that person a break. What could I say? Sometimes students try that on me, and let me say now, it doesn't work. Okay. All right. And
why that?
what's that? Why
And
is
why? The reason behind it, the premise.
well, well, if they don't do well, and that's no reason to give that person an A. I mean, what then? If I give that person an A, then I should give everyone an A, right? To be fair, right? I have to give everyone an A, not just that person. Okay, so it's a matter of justice. Okay, not my argument is one from justice, not from pity. Okay, not to be a good person, but I'm a good person anyway. But we could talk more about that later or never. Another example is just do as I ask before you give me a heart attack. Okay, that's an appeal to emotion. Just do it. It may make me, be sick. Well, that's not a reason why you should do it. I should give you a reason. Another appeals to force or fear. The arguer tries to get you to accept their view on the grounds that you will be harmed if you don't. They attempt to motivate you from fear rather than logically persuade you. So for an example, so you're an animal rights activist. I consider changing my views if I were you, because most of us here on the prairies are beef farmers and we don't care too much for your kind. So in that message, there's a hidden message that your views on animal rights are not you shouldn't hold that view because you may get in trouble. And that's I mean one have to give an argument. Well, there's a whole body of reasoning about animal rights, but you can't convince someone not to be an animal rights activist just because they should fear what you're going to do. So appeals to emotion. You attempt to manipulate an emotional response in place of a valid or compelling argument. Instead of facts, persuasive language is used to develop the foundation of an appeal to emotion-based argument. Thus, the validity of the premises that establish such an argument does not prove to be verifiable. Appeals to emotion includes, as we've said before, appeals to fear, envy, hatred, pity, pride, and more. Again, the fallacy occurs when the emotion is used instead of a logical argument. And there's negative emotions, appeal to fear, anxiety, guilt, anger, sadness, disgust. Positive emotions, empathy, compassion, pride, relief, hope. Again, these are all emotions used to get you to consider their point of view. So, like that article, that editorial about the euthanasia. Um, there were, if you remember that editorial in the Wall Street Journal, and this person is trying to use negative emotions. I can't remember the exact words, but that person was using horrendous practice um, and some other words, and was trying to use words to raise your I guess I guess it might be disgust, raise your emotions for disgust. Now there may be good arguments against the practice of assisted suicide, um, but you have to steer away from emotions. Also in that article, I think I pointed out the person writing the editorial was associating assisted suicide with euthanasia, and there are two different things. And I guess maybe you could call that guilt by association. You're trying to associate assisted suicide with euthanasia, and people um, have more negative um, reaction to euthanasia, um, and and therefore, if you associate assisted suicide with euthanasia, you're trying to persuade someone by associating assisted suicide with euthanasia. Uh, Euthanasia is also, as an aside, people argue against euthanasia for saying, well, uh, you're killing someone, and that in and of itself um, is not a complete argument as to why euthanasia is 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 wrong. Um, and actually, if I could bring in another thought, um, uh, taking um, someone off a ventilator. Now, uh, you guys have to remind me in clinical medicine in Bahrain. Do you take patients off the ventilator to let them
We don't
die?
have, no, we don't have even DNR. No,
I thought that was changing.
no, we
You
don't
don't have
have.
DNR in
Yeah,
Bahrain?
because no, because we are following also our Islamic rules, and we don't have that DNR or take ventilator from the patient.
I
No,
thought I thought there was recently some fatwas and other statements that DNR is good. I don't want to get off the subject here, but uh, we'll save that for another day when I teach clinical ethics. But a um, um, a what was I going to say? Um, when I'm just trying to think of what I was going. Um, and, oh, so uh, okay, so in other countries, not only DNR, but taking patients off the ventilators is could be considered well, it's not always a bad thing, um, especially if a patient said, if I'm ever on a ventilator, I I don't want unwanted treatment. That's allowed in some other countries. Um, and and it might be good to understand why. Well, I think uh, I'm just thinking about the arguments of why it's wrong. Some people could say it's only God has the right to decide when someone dies, and that happens in uh, many religions, not just in Islam. But let's say in the U.S., it's it it's not necessarily wrong, and um, so if you have a person come into the intensive care unit and it takes a patient off the ventilator, and the patient dies, uh, when the person who took the person off the ventilator goes to the judge, he may say that I didn't kill the patient. The patient died from his illness, um, and 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 we do that not infrequently. And the judge says, well, the difference between what you did and what family members do is that, or when doctors take patients off the ventilator, they have permission or consent from the family, or what the previous person said. So the guilty person is trying to make an argument, well, we do it all the time. Um, and if when a doctor takes a patient off the ventilator, um, is that actually killing? Um, and actually, in one sense, it is. But the doctor in American society has gotten permission, and also the argument is that people should not have unwanted treatment. So again, if the person has said previously, I didn't want to have that treatment, one goes with autonomy. Anyway, enough about clinical ethics, which I find fascinating. But examples appeal to emotion. A real estate um, ad that shows a happy young family with children moving into the home of their dreams, right? You see that on commercials. People, uh, go with this real estate company, and you see a lot of happy people moving in the house. In fact, that's the whole advertising business, right? Is based on appeals to emotion, right? You see, I mean, what type of people are in ads showing off the clothes? Okay, well, if they're really, what could I say, attractive people, and they're appealing to your emotion. Oh, she looks good, or he looks good. Okay, they're trying to. The ad industry is always appealing to emotion. Um, well, let me move along here. Okay, a political ad that shows. Um, well, here's a in the top picture on the right. He's starving. We're not. It's time to share. So this person is making an argument that you should contribute to this cause, and so on one hand, the argument is that the person is starving is a good argument, but showing that picture is appealing to your emotion to want to give. Um, Appeal to tradition. The arguer bases the acceptance of a position on the mere fact that they always believed it, and that hence it should always be accepted in society. So essentially, this is what I say: an is not an ought, meaning just because it's been done centuries before doesn't make it right. Um, and and so one example that um, occurs in a lot of societies, genital mutilation. And some people argue, well, we've always done that, and therefore it's right. But then if you inspect the logic, you can't say it's right just because it's been done before. And actually, if you sit down and reason, one um, the the argument against that is one of women's rights. So again, you can't appeal to tradition to uh, make someone accept your argument. Um, let me, post hoc, short. Uh, Post hoc means after this, therefore caused by this. So the fallacy, this is a common fallacy, assumes that just because B happened after A, then it must have been caused by A. Okay, so well, maybe it was caused by A, but that's not necessarily true. So it's what we have here is only an association, and you know that in um, medical statistics, just because there's an association, A occurs, has A is correlated with B, doesn't necessarily mean that B was caused by A. You could, and we see this in papers all the time, that the author of a paper says A causes B when the statistics only shows a correlation. Correlation doesn't mean causation. Um, Here's an example. Since Governor Bush took office, unemployment of minorities in the state has decreased by 7%. Um, Governor Bush should be applauded for reducing unemployment among minorities. So just because when Governor Bush became governor, unemployment dropped. Well, that doesn't mean that two associated events. That doesn't mean he he had something to do with that. And you know, politicians are always using this. Um, Hasty generalization, a conclusion based on insufficient or unrepresentative evidence. And this is common in science when you have an unrepresentative sample size. That's why sample size is very, very important. So, for example, the only redheads I know are rude, therefore, all redheads must have bad manners. Again, this is the speaker only knows two redheads, and the speaker now generalize, and we do that in research a lot of times. That's why, again, a sample size is important, and also you want to have good representation of the sample. We talk about a biased sample size or a insufficient sample size, or consent bias. If you don't have a good representative sample, then you're going to lead to a hasty generalization. Let me skip that. Oh, a false analogy. An analogy points out similarities in things that are otherwise different. So a false analogy claims comparison when differences outweigh similarity. So let's say comparing oranges with apples, someone may say, well, apples and oranges are round, and therefore they're both good for you. Well, there's a lot of differences between oranges and apples. Another, probably a better example is we're now doing transplants using hearts and kidneys of pigs. Um, and animal rights activists say that's um, you know, we shouldn't treat animals that way. And someone might say, well, we a lot of societies, they eat pork, uh, and we slaughter pigs um, to eat. Therefore, using organs from pigs is okay. So they're using that analogy, but that's a false analogy in the sense that, well, now you have to give an argument why it's okay to eat pigs. Okay, you can't use the fact that you could also say that's an appeal to tradition. Well, we always eat pigs. We always slaughter pigs to eat. So why can't it be right to use their organs as well? Well, it goes deeper than arguing from analogy or tradition between those two arguments. Let me skip this in the interest of time. Oh, let me go over two more and we'll take a break. A straw man. Um, the arguer makes her own position appear stronger by misrepresenting her opponent's position as being weak, as a weak argument or incredible. So essentially, the person is creating what we call a straw man. A straw man is someone is weak, right? It's made out of straw, and you're making your argument stronger by uh, falsely representing the opposing argument as being weak. So, for example, Mr. Goldberg has argued against prayer in public schools. Obviously, Mr. Goldberg advocates atheism, but atheism is what they used in Russia, blah, blah, blah. And so uh, the person is trying to say that Mr. Goldberg has argued against prayer in public schools, and the person is trying to say, well, Mr. Goldberg advocates atheism, and it's very uh, easy to say that atheism is wrong, and therefore his argument against prayer in public school has to be wrong. So it's kind of like substituting a weak argument for Mr. Goldberg's argument about prayer in public school. Another example: a student tells his professor that he thinks some of Donald Trump's position have merit, and the professor says he can't believe that the student believes in supporting racism. Uh, so the professor brings up a an argument that's considered a straw argument in the sense that, well, no one believes that racism is good, but the professor is trying to negate what the students think Donald Trump's position have merit by substituting racism while he believes in racism, and therefore you can't believe Donald Trump's position on merit. Um, Either or false dilemma. A false dilemma asserts that a complex situation can have only two possible outcomes and that one of the options is necessary or preferable. Either go to college or forget about making money. This forcefully implies that a college education is a prerequisite for financial success. So this is an either or dilemma. It's something that we use on our children. I don't know if you have children, but frequently parents give children, well, you either eat your dinner or you go to bed without television. So it's a false dilemma, and so naturally the kid is going to say, okay, I'll eat my dinner. That's not an argument to eat your dinner. Um, let me go over this one. A slippery slope. Let me end by this. This occurs very frequently, and I think we've seen that in some of our previous exercise. Essentially, an arguer claims that if a certain seemingly harmless action, A, is permitted, but A will lead to B, and B will lead to C, and so on. And the arguer holds that D is a terrible thing and therefore should not be permitted. In fact, there's no good reason to believe that A will actually lead to B. So a person will say, well, we can't accept that because it's going to be a slippery slope into D, and D is a bad thing, and therefore we shouldn't allow A. And that's the only argument why we should not allow A. And so essentially what's happening here, let me right, yeah, so let me concentrate on this. It's the feared consequences strike us as unlikely. However, um, the what I'm trying to say is that the slippery slope argument is that someone will make you believe that A will lead to B, and B is a horrendous act. But there's no evidence that A will lead to B. But the arguer is trying to claim that falsely, it's trying to instill fear in you of something happening like B, which is horrendous, and trying to use fear of what might happen to claim that A should not occur. And A is harmless, but they're saying that A will lead to B. And that's why we should not accept A, even though A is not a bad thing. It's a slippery slope. In fact, in that editorial, what the author of the editorial started to use that phrase, the tippy toe, if you remember that. He said it's not a slippery slope, it's a tippy toe into harvesting organs. It's trying to use fear to prevent you to accept A. And let me end by this, begging the question. This is a kind of circular argument where the strength of the premise is dependent on the truth of the conclusion. It essentially only restates the claim. So, for example, wrestling is dangerous because it is unsafe. Okay, well, the conclusion is that it's dangerous, but the premise is it's unsafe. So the conclusion is based on the premise. It's restating the premise. It still begs the question because you haven't answered anything. So put another way, the arguer supports the conclusion simply by restating it as a premise or by leaving out a key premise. I know she loves me because she told me so. And you don't lie to someone you love. Okay, so, well, she loves me. Okay, and the premise is that, well, she doesn't lie to me because she loves me. It's another way is it's circular reasoning. You circle back to the premise. So the last one on this slide, murder is morally wrong. This being the case, it follows that abortion is morally wrong. Well, the conclusion follows the premise. Murder is morally wrong. Abortion is morally wrong. And the premise that's being left out is that murder is abortion is murder, but as I explained before, you have to do more arguments you have to state more premises in order to state to have a good a good a good argument. So let me well let's take